I was recently sent this article from Dimitra Melnik called "Time to Hello World," where Dimitra is trying something really interesting. He's trying to code a Hello World application and deploy it on VMs versus containers versus PaaS versus fast, and basically comparing the amount of effort and the amount of time that it takes him to get from nothing to something deployed. And he does even create this very interesting chart comparing the amount of work and the amount of time. And of course, this is very anecdotal. He's using specifically Google Cloud Platform, but AWS or Azure would be pretty much the same and have the same kind of offerings there. But what this actually made me think was what are the options in the Clojure ecosystem, particularly now that we have Datomic Ions available. If you're not familiar with Datomic Ions yet, I do recommend watching this short video. It's actually 7 minutes from Stuart Holloway, where he explains in more details what Datomic Ions are. But the most important diagram is this one, at least for our intentions here. I want to do a Hello World application and then from scratch. I have no idea how long it's going to take, but I want us to go and do this together and see how hard or how easy it is. So what we are going to do is use the Datomic Cloud's CloudFormation this template to activate all these different products and different services within AWS. We will have a Datomic database instance. We're not going to be using that at all as part of this tutorial, but we do want to create a Hello World application in Clojure, deploy to Datomic Cloud, and see it running in the cloud. First thing we need to do, and let's start the clock, is go to AWS Marketplace. I already have Datomic Cloud saved here. It's actually the only thing that I have saved. Let's click on it. If you don't have it, probably you have to search for it. There's going to be a little bit of a next kind of situation here. We do have to choose a few things. One of them is the template you want to use. We want to use a solo template because it is the one for small projects or for one developer kind of situation. We want to make sure it's the latest version. 4.02 is the latest one as of this filming. And for me particularly, I'm not using my default region. It's a little bit polluted. It's full of things. I want us to be in a clean region. So that's why I'm using US East to Ohio. So let's continue to launch. Let's launch CloudFormation. It's going to ask us for a few more things, not many. It's going to download the template itself from Cognitect's bucket, and we will create this. I really like giving a name that is very personal so that people who are a part of this organization and see all the stuff that I have created, they know that this is part of my stack that is personal to me. It could be specific to an application or specific to a production environment, QA environment, or whatever. I already have a key pair for my EC2 instances, and pretty much that's it. I'm not going to change anything else. I press next, next again. On this very last screen, we have to acknowledge that CloudFormation might create some AEM resources, which should be fine. And this is going to send us to the CloudFormation dashboard where we see that our stack has been created and there is a nested one there being created as well. This one is called storage. I gave such a long name that it's not showing here. There you go, it's a storage and some kind of UUID. The one thing that is interesting about Datomic Cloud is that it's broken down into a storage stack and a compute stack. The compute stack is going to be created after the storage one is created. We can leave this running for a while because it's going to take a while. And meanwhile, we can head to our Emacs and or editor or whatever it is that you have and start creating our code. A bit of a disclaimer here. I already have Clojure installed. I should have Clojure 1.9. If you don't, you should definitely have that installed as well. And I also have the AWS CLI, which is one of the latest versions, at least it's the one that is compatible. And my AWS CLI is already configured to access my account. So if you have some trouble connecting those things, yeah, you should clear that out before. So let's just start by creating a folder. I'm going to create a folder here called Ions Hello World. There you go. Entering it, and let's create the very first file called daps Eden. If you're not familiar with dapps Eden, the tools dapps, I do recommend you reading up on it a little bit. It's a fascinating new feature from Clojure 1.9. It does solve quite many problems, and the one thing that I like doing as soon as I start a dapps Eden file is always remember to add sources, my source folder and my resources folder into the class path, because I tend to forget that. And in terms of dependencies, I haven't memorized yet, but the ions reference, there we go, it's even selected. I'm selecting something else. Make sure this is selectable. There you go. And what this is doing is nothing really rocket science, basically. It's just adding Datomic Ion itself as a dependency for production. And it's pointing to a Maven repo that is specific for Datomic, where probably the guys from the Datomic team are publishing their releases. And also creates an alias for development here, where there is an extra dependency that is going to be used for us to manage our the cloud and our deployment on the cloud. We're going to do quite a few things with this ion dev in a second. Before we do that, let's create our, make sure that the folder is there. Where is it? I'm too tired to see it. Oh, it's there. Ions Hello World. So there you are, our dapps Eden file. Let's create a source folder. Inside the source, let's create an Ions Hello World folder, and inside this guy let's create a core.clj. Make sure that it's saved. It is. ns ions hello world.core. There you go. We have our very first file, and I'm going to create a function that will be say hello, no parameters, and the only thing it does is return hello world with three exclamation marks. If everything is fine, our REPL should be able to evolve this and test whether say hello works or not. I'm just starting a REPL session, and meanwhile let's check on our CloudFormation. Let's refresh. Still in progress. Seems to be doing okay. Let's see if there are any events. It will be creating a lot of stuff for you. Hopefully it's going to create everything that I need. And if I go back there, yeah, it's still creating. That's great. Let's go back to Emacs. There you go. My REPL is here. Oops, did I evolve this right? No, I didn't. I'm evaluating this one specific file. Let's change to that namespace, and then let's run say hello. There you go, our say hello function works as we would expect. Now we're almost ready to publish this. The one thing that ions need is a file, and let me go back to our folder here where we have ions hello world. There we go. So one of the things that ions need is a configuration file that explains to ions which are the functions that we want to expose as ion functions. So it does look for a file in the path datomic/ion config Eden. I'm going to do that in the resources folder because I think that that's a little bit clearer. Let's create a Datomic folder in here, and in here let's create an ion config Eden file. There you go. The first thing we need to do in this map is list the functions we are allowing, and with a full namespace. So the one we created, I think, is ions hello world.core. We did even find that, say hello. So now we basically told ions this function is allowed as an ions. However, we're not really connecting it with anything. So the one thing that I want to expose this function to is to the external world through a lambda. That's the way that ions does it. It's not going to deploy that function directly on the lambda. It's going to create a proxy that will then call my EC2 instance. That's a little bit of a technicality, but it's interesting to mention. So the way that we do that is by creating a map here where we give it a name. So I'm giving the same name as the function. So this is going to be the name of the lambda. And this guy, I need to point to the function itself. and it's exactly the same as the one I have just allowed up there. And it does add a few, it does allow me to do a few more things, like adding a fine description that will be added to this lambda. So I'll say here, this lambda says hello. We're going to be able to see that later. And the last thing that we have to do here is add an application name, if I'm not mistaken. Let's check that in the reference here. The reference is very clear. App name. There you go. App name. App name. And I'm going to name my app the same as my stack, which was Datomic Cloud, and my name for now. Right? So this should be almost okay. And I notice here when we check the CloudFormation that storage was already complete, which is a very good sign. And now CloudFormation is creating the compute section of the stack. So now very soon my Datomic Cloud Lucene is going to be ready for deployment. Meanwhile, while that is still going on, let's come back to the code and let's remember that, well, our code works fine. Our code works totally fine. But there is one interesting thing. As soon as we connect to the say hello function as a lambda, it's going to receive a map as a parameter. And let's make sure we at least trap that map here. The two keys that are of relevancy in this map are input and context. If you have done any lambda coding before, you know pretty much that input is what is sent as part of the payload of the request for that lambda, and the context is a much bigger object that has a bunch of stuff. We don't really need those guys here because I'm just actually sending hello world. I'm going to keep them there just for the sake of the signature of the function and also for clarity on this specific, I messed up, on this specific tutorial. I evolved this whole thing again, and of course if I call say hello, it's going to fail because I'm not sending a map. If I do send a map, everything's fine. My hello world is working okay. Going back to this guy, actually this is taking longer than coding itself, which is great. Of course, once you have your Datomic Cloud up and running, you won't have to wait for anything. This is just going to be a horse for you. It's going to do whatever you need to pull all the weight that you need from on a daily basis. Meanwhile, there are a few other things we're going to need to do here. So let's make sure that we have all those things in place in preparation for our work. So one interesting thing about Datomic Cloud is that the basic stack will create a Datomic Cloud that is completely behind a VPC. It's completely protected, completely private from the external world. You do have access to it. We're going to set it up in a second as soon as this part is over, but there are two parts to it. The first part is having a SSH, a opening port 22 on your Bastion server. And if you're not familiar with Bastion, I do recommend reading a little bit on it. It's a great concept that we all should be totally aware of. And we're going to create a SSH tunnel to our local development machine so that it does feel like everything else is running locally. And it does give us access to the Ions stack as a whole. So this is still creating, so we cannot actually change this side of the equation yet. So let's go to the client side and download where is it? Here. In the Datomic Cloud documentation, this is basically one of the most fundamental things that you should have is this Datomic socks proxy script. Let me copy the link. Let me make sure that I have a copy here. You don't need to have a copy of that in your project file, in your project folder, but it does, of course, help having it somewhere. I'm putting it here for now. This is going to be the one script that connects our local environment here, that creates a proxy between our local environment and the Datomic Cloud to make it look like it's running locally. course, it's not going to run until we are ready here. Oh, and that's awesome. It's ready. So I'll show you what happens if you try to connect before finalizing all the things. The way we call it is the Datomic Socks proxy. I do have to add a /r east2 because it's not my default one, and I have to give it the name of the system I'm connecting to, which in this case, Datomic Cloud Lucchini. In your specific setup, it's going to be whatever name you gave here. So you're going to see that this is nothing more than just a more elaborate SSH proxy setup. It's going to connect to, it's going to try to connect to my specific Bastion server that is running on this IP for some reason. It's going to try to connect to port 22. It's not going to work, and I know it for a fact because the way that these guys set this up is that it is secure by default, and you have to decide to open your Bastion to external access. So if I go to my EC2 instances, you're gonna see that we have one, which is our basic computing system, computing EC2, and then we have a Bastion instance. And for the Bastion one, it is connected to a security group that currently does not allow any inbound traffic. Actually, nothing allows any inbound traffic. The only thing we're going to do here is make sure that we allow SSH traffic from anywhere. You could actually list your IP here for even more security if you want, but for now, let's do anywhere. And this is going to enable SSH traffic into my Bastion and allow me to create the tunnel that I want to create here. Actually, because I was doing that and running this at the same time, this actually passed now. It's going to ask me to add the key to the key ring. I say yes, and that's great. Then it means here that I am running and I'm connected. So now that I'm connected, I can do the very first thing, which is deploy. I will try to remember this. We have to call closure, calling the alias dev, and remember the alias dev here specifically, it's coming from our daps Eden. So I'm going to be making sure that not only I have access to this namespace or whatever else I have in daps, in the daps node, but also everything else that I have in the extra daps in this specific alias. And I'm going to call the main function, and I don't really recall. I have to check here in the tutorial. I haven't memorized that yet. This is the name of the main function, or the class that has the main function at least. And what we're basically doing here is saying, please, Ion dev, do something for me, run something. And the way that the guys from Cognitech and the Datomic team actually have done this is that you have this, you send this Eden package as part of the payload as an argument there, where you basically describe what you want to do. And what we want to do here is actually push. Push is the very first thing that you have to do when pushing to code to a Datomic Cloud. Let's run this, and it's going to fail. And it's going to fail. I want to explain why, because this is a very important concept that is going on here. Awesome. It failed, and it should. Datomic Ions are very opinionated, and it's trying to basically get the version of your Git to make a deployment or a deployment package, which is called the revision in the code deploy lingo, if you will. Because it couldn't find any kind of Git information, it's basically exploding on your face. It couldn't run Git status. This is great stuff because it's forcing me to actually be way more controlled and way more detailed in what I'm doing. If I'm deploying something, I need to have this on Git. So let's at least get in this folder, and you're going to see that the error is going to change. I'm going to try it again because I'm really stubborn and I want to push no matter what. Git status should work, so it will at least pass that one barrier. And it's going to give me a separate error, and it's also a very good error. It's saying you must either specify a uname or deploy from a clean Git commit. If this was a basic project, so I already tested, and again, let's remember that I already tested, where is it? Here. So I already tested here. Everything is working the way it should work. I could write tests. I could do whatever I wanted, run those tests. I'm happy. I would submit a commit, and that commit would be my revision. It would be the starting point for a potential deploy. Because I'm not doing that, I have to open up an exception. And the way that Datomic Ions allow an exception is by creating this uname, which stands for unique name or unrepeatable, unreproducible name. It is an unreproducible deploy because it's only out of the specific setup that I have on my computer right now. It's kind of a wrong thing to do, but let's do it just for the sake of like testing this thing out, right? I'm gonna call it the hello one because probably gonna push more than one revision. By calling it hello one and using hello one as a unique name, what Datomic Ions is doing is creating a full revision of my code and sending that to code deploy. It's not going to deploy yet, but it does create a revision, and that's great. It's downloading a few of the jars that I probably didn't have yet on my system. I have a very slow connection, so it will probably take a while, but I like what I'm seeing. And there you go. So it does print out this Eden at the very end, which was the uname, and also it gives me a hint of the next command I have to run if I want to deploy. But before deploying, I want to head back out to our AWS, and I want to go into code deploy because I want to show you what that op push actually prepared. So within my deployment group, I now have a revision, and this is specifically the hello one that we created. So it did pack my application, the hello world application, and send as a revision. This is amazing good practice. Of course, not calling it hello one. I would much rather have my git SHA there as an indicator of what this thing is about, but imagine actually doing that in a very controlled fashion. It's not actually live yet, and this is what we're going to be doing next. What we're going to be doing next is running a similar command like this one. I'm going to even copy and paste this one from what it proposed to me. So it's a closure adev, also using the Datomic Ion dev. The op now is deploy. We want to deploy a very specific revision to a very specific deployment group. So the name of the deployment group is something that we copy from here, from our what is this? Code deploy dashboard. So there is the application that we created as part of the stack, and now it will the CloudFormation template is going to create a deployment group for you, and you just need that one big string. And also, let's make sure that I send the uname of the one revision that I created. Of course, if you try to deploy something that has been pushed, that hasn't been pushed, it's not going to work. In this case, I'm doing everything supposedly right. I really like this next command, and you see that Datomic Ions is smart enough to actually give me kind of the next command here. I have to just clean it up a little bit because of my weird E shell. But what this one is doing is saying, you know what, this is an asynchronous operation, so you pretty much want to check the status. So if you run this command, this operation deploy status, and of course it gives you this very long ARN for you to see what's happening, it's going to tell you what is the deploy status, which in this case is running. So it is deploying the code that we just created. It does have, Ion has two separate status for deployment, one which is called deploy per se, and one which is the full stack. And the way that I understand this is that code deploy is one thing that manages the deployment of the code as part of the EC2 instances, and Ions itself needs a lot more time, not necessarily a lot more time, but needs more space to also deal with lambda creation, lambda retirement, and those things. So you will end up having two statuses, and every now and again you're going to see those two in different states. They were both running. I'm going to call it again and see if they are successful. Both are successful. This is awesome. Now I'm going to try to remember this next one from the top of my head. And remember, what we really want to do is make sure that we're able to call say hello, right? So what I really want to do is use the AWS CLI to call lambda, and I think it's invoke, and then you give it a name, which in this case is an interesting kind of opinionated way of doing this. You have to take your, okay, I'm gonna explain that in a second. Let me just make sure that I copy this and I don't mess up very much. Out. This should work. Okay, so what I have done here, let me explain that. I'm using my CLI, AWS, command lambda, subcommand invoke. I want to invoke a lambda. And the name of the lambda, in order for the name of the lambda to be unique, and remember, in the ions config file, where did I put the config file? Here. In the config file, I call it say hello. So I'm starting backwards. Say hello is the suffix, and the prefix is my compute unit. So this is the way that Datomic Cloud has automatically created my lambda as part of this whole setup. And of course, I got this wrong because I tried to remember, oh yeah, I have to specify this dash dash function name for this guy. Function name. And I still got this wrong, probably because my memory, it's not very good. And let's see here, where did it go? Invoke function name, lambda invoke. Yeah, I did it again, right? Lambda invoke, because I can't write function name. Function name. Okay, this is good news. It's taken a while, probably because it did find the lambda, but the lambda was code. So the lambda needs to be warmed up. It is a feature of lambdas more than anything else. Once the lambda is warmed up, it will run much faster, and I can actually show that here, running a few times. And this is our hello world. It gives us some extra metadata that we can fully ignore here, of course, because it's just sending us the hello world, which is exactly what we want. In terms of the time that it took us to get this up and running, I would actually assume that this is more than enough. We accomplished our target. We got our hello world up and running as a lambda, but I want to give a little bit of an extra here and also expose this not only as a lambda but also as an API request, right? No, it should be straightforward. And actually, it does require a little bit more work, but it is quite straightforward as well. So let's change this function very quickly. A few things we have to do because it's not going to be triggered as a normal lambda anymore. The parameters that we receive in the map are slightly different, but nothing really that different than you're used to receive as a ring handler or something like this, like headers and body. We're going to ignore these guys, but God knows, let's leave them there for now. Something else that we have to do, again, this is very similar to what you would do for a local development or a development on a ring or a pedestal. We have to add this as a body, and because it's an HTTP response, let's wrap it up with a status, and let's make sure that headers are also fine, that we have content type text plain. This should make it, more or less. Let's eval this. Let's go back to a REPL, and let's see what happens when we call this guy now. As you would expect, you get the updated map for what we have done. Let's head back to the ion config. And the one thing we're going to have to do here is, you see where this lambda is exposed. We're going to still expose this as a lambda, but now we have to tell ions that this lambda is going to be integrated as a proxy for HTTP requests in the API gateway later. So the way you do this is you add an extra keyword here called integration. I haven't really fully memorized that yet, but in the ions reference, you will find this option here for integration. If you point to this other keyword here, API gateway /proxy, you're going to be telling ions that please prepare this lambda, say hello, for API gateway proxy integration later. We're going to get to the proxy integration in a second. Before we get there, there are a few more things we have to do. And so what we have to do back in our function is deal with the interfaces that API gateway proxy will expose to us in a slightly different way. And the nice guys from the Datomic team, they have prepared a helper function specifically. Let's make sure that we require that helper function here. And let me try to remember, how it's called. Ionize. Yeah, there you go. This is the nice little guy that we have to inject here. Let's call it gateway. And what we have to do is create, let's rename this differently. Let's rename this handler, and let's have a def say hello that now is API gateway ionize say hello handler. Let me explain what we're doing here. Datomic has this one specific NS namespace here with one function called ionize that allows us to point to a function handler that will do our magic. Our previous say hello is now a say hello handler, and we will plug say hello as a lambda that will be exposed outside. The reason why we're doing all this kind of trickery here is because API gateway integration is not so trivial. It has some back and forth, and we're basically delegating all this management to this function ionize, and this function ionize is being nice enough to wrap the parameters and then wrap the response in a nice function to us. I'm going to make sure that this compiles. It does. And of course, say hello now doesn't work anymore, as you wouldn't expect, because now what we do is that we test our say hello handler instead. As long as I can write say hello handler. There you go. That's fine. Again, I would write my test around this guy and everything would be fine. Let's just make sure we did everything right. Yeah, we're still pointing to this guy, this lambda, integration. You know what? It does seem to be all right. So because I think it is all right, let's go to the shell. Let's go all the way back to our push. Let's create a hello 2. It's going to create a revision for us. Remember, now we changed a bunch of stuff. It did. Super nice. Now let's check our, let's deploy. Same compute unit, let's deploy revision 2. Awesome. And now let's get this guy. Let's check the state, status. It's going to take a bit longer because we'll have to recreate the lambdas in a slightly different way. Awesome, it's running. So while this is running, it's going to take a few seconds. Let's head back to our AWS and let's create the connections we need to create in the API gateway. The first thing we're going to have to do, my API gateway is completely empty. Let's create a new one. I'm going to call it Datomic Cloud Routine for now. Don't really care about the name right now. And I'm going to create an action. I'm going to create a resource, and this resource is a proxy resource, so you don't have to change anything. It is part of the trickery that will connect API gateway and that ionize function. We do have to point to a lambda function. I don't even know if that lambda function is already available. Let's check the status again. It should see succeeded, fine. So our lambda should be there. And say hello, there you go, it's there. Save. We're going to give access to everyone to that one function. It's okay. Great, so this should be fine. We need to create a stage for us to be able to deploy this. Let's give it a name, stage. I think we also have to change the settings. because the way that that ionize function is sending the data back is pretty much in a binary mode. Save that, and everything should be fine. Let's test this. Yes, we did get the response body. It's in base 64, therefore the binary that we selected elsewhere. The one thing that we had a little bit of trouble here was creating a deployment stage. Okay, so I was missing a crucial step, and that's why I was not able to create a stage. I didn't deploy my API. So the way it works, you go into your API, and then you go into Actions and Deploy API. A deployment stage, it doesn't have one. Just choose New Stage. Let's call it Dev for now. And let's deploy. And then it did deploy now to stage, which is great. And I should have an invoke URL. Let's copy and paste this invoke URL. Head back to Emacs or to your terminal, whatever it is. And let's scroll that URL into Datomic. And let's see what we get out of it. And we do get our hello world as part of an HTTP 200. So just for the sake of it, let's also head back to our browser. And we should also see hello world there, as one would expect. There you are. Very easily, very good practices, different stages, revisions, controlling versioning, being able to debug and code directly through your REPL, and on top of all that, also having the amazing Datomic that we didn't even reach to as of now. We're simply just having good practices and the ability to deploy Clojure code, and which I hope was quite fast and quite straightforward. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.